You don't have to know how to make a movie. If you truly love cinema with all your heart and with enough passion, you can't help but make a good movie.
If you're like me, you love films, to the extent to where it goes beyond just watching a movie, but also watching the behind the scenes and watching directors' interviews to find out their intentions in making a film. Hell, you probably want to make a film yourself one day. The question is then, how? How do you get to the level to where you can make a film? Unlike other jobs, there isn't a step-to-step guide on how to do it. If you want to be a doctor, that is time, money, and labor intensive, but the steps are there. And once you're done with medical school, you can start working pretty much immediately. To become a lawyer, you just have to take a test. It's probably better that you go to school, but it's not required. And once you pass the bar, you can probably start working at a firm immediately. That's not to say that these jobs are easy. Far from it. The paths to getting there are filled with many challenges, but there is a path, unlike getting to filmmaking to where there just really isn't one. Disclaimer, this applies to a lot of jobs in the entertainment industry, not just filmmaking, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be solely focusing on that. So, you want to be a filmmaker. What do you do? Well, the first thing you probably look at is all those behind the scenes videos that you love to watch and all those directors' interviews that you have been watching for all those years. Maybe those directors gave some helpful advice on struggling filmmakers. After all, the most asked question to a director is any advice to young, aspiring directors.
Anyone starting out in film, they're just about to write their first script, try to finance their first movie, what's the single biggest piece of advice you can give them that might save them at least a few headaches?
You think it's still possible for an up-and-coming filmmaker to go the route you guys went and still be successful?
I was hoping if you had any little gold nuggets of information or advice for someone on the ground floor, I'd love to hear them.
Could you offer any advice to someone who is young, bright-eyed, and earnestly trying to get right in there?
Is your advice? You must have a lot of young people that say, Bo, how do I get into the business? How do I accomplish what you've accomplished? What's your advice for young people?
Unfortunately, more times than not, they are extremely unhelpful, and their advice is more or less useless. I'm not saying you shouldn't listen to directors to learn about the craft of filmmaking, but in terms of practical, helpful advice, there's nothing there. They're just not going to do anything for you, and I'm going to explain why. First, let's examine that clip from Quentin Tarantino again.
You don't have to know how to make a movie. If you truly love cinema with all your heart and with enough passion, you can't help but make a good movie.
I can't be the only one that is very frustrated by this clip. I mean, loves movies? Newsflash, Quentin, everyone loves movies. Filmmaking is such a hard industry to get into, you can't just jump into it. The only reason you're going to pursue that as a career is if you already love filmmaking, making that bit completely just useless. And what's that last part he says?
If you truly love cinema with all your heart and with enough passion, you can't help but make a good movie.
Are you sure? Are you sure, Quentin? Because I bet Tommy Wiseau loves movies.
I used to know a girl. She had a dozen guys. One of them found out about it, beat her up so bad she ended up in a hospital on Guerrero Street.
What a story, Mark.
For those of you who don't know, Tommy Wiseau self-financed, self-directed, and starred in the 2003 film The Room, commonly hailed as one of the worst movies of all time.
You can come out now, Johnny. She's gone.
In a few minutes, bitch.
And despite how bad it is, it's very clear Tommy Wiseau had a huge passion for filmmaking.
You're tearing me apart! I never hit you. You are tearing me apart, Lisa!
Also, isn't it a little annoying to hear Quentin Tarantino, of all people, say this? The guy whose career was given to him on a silver platter after one of his friends just happened to know a film professor who just happened to know Harvey Keitel, who then just decided to finance Reservoir Dogs, giving Quentin $1 million to make the movie however he wanted. And now Quentin's just going to say, if you love movies enough, you're guaranteed to make a great film? Now look, I don't like harping on Quentin Tarantino like this, because He is undeniably talented. In fact, a lot of the directors I'm about to talk about are also extremely talented people. Truth be told, there are a lot of people who are talented. A lot of people trying to get into the film industry who are talented. But not a lot of them become directors. Because becoming a director is based more on just talent. And not a lot of people like to talk about this, but it takes a considerable amount of luck. And that is the absolute truth. Now, people are probably going to get very defensive at that statement. Don't you know Robert Rodriguez let people do scientific experiments on him in order for him to finance his first film? Don't you know James Cameron had 2-for-1 coupons on Big Macs, bought both of them one day, would eat one that day, and then save the other one for the next day? And of course, people are going to get extremely defensive at the idea that their favorite directors did not get to where they were solely based on their talent. Didn't you see that one shot from Martin Scorsese where it's just like the camera is just like, and he's going to the club, like, oh my god, didn't you see the chase scene in The Dark Knight where the Batmobile drives and the explosion happens under the Batmobile? Do you think you could film a Batmobile driving above an explosion as well as Nolan? Huh? And of course, people are going to completely question the validity of this statement because they're just going to assume it's not, I'm just complaining and that I'm just lazy. It has nothing to do with the luck of getting in the industry. Maybe I'm just bad and, again, very lazy. I'm lazy. Look, no matter who you are in the industry, to get to where you want to be, you are inevitably going to face struggles. That is inevitable. That does not mean that you did not get to where you are by some ounce of luck. James Cameron knew Gale Ann Hurd, and she got him a meeting at Canon Pictures, the studio that would eventually finance the first Terminator film. Robert Rodriguez's story is a bit more complicated, and I'm going to get into him later. And of course, it's worth restating, talent does not negate luck. Just because you were lucky, it does not take away from the fact that you might have been very talented at what you do. In fact, the directors I'm talking about here are just not good directors. Some of them are absolute masters of their craft who have made classics. And look, you don't know me, so calling me lazy or saying whatever, it's pointless. And it's not what the video is trying to say. I'm not saying it's too hard, why bother? I'm just kind of trying to explain the frustration a lot of young filmmakers must feel when they look up to all these great directors and find out the steps that they took to get to where they are is completely unattainable. But let's analyze some more directors and see what they're saying. After all, maybe Quentin was just a fluke and some of the other ones gave some better advice. The biggest thing you will hear from a lot of directors is that, hey, nowadays making a movie is so much easier because of all this amazing technology that we have to our disposal.
I wish I was starting now, because you have a new technology that you can make a movie with that's cheap.
First of all, young people now have a huge advantage, which is anyone can make a movie cheap. I mean, you can take your flip camera and your laptop and Final Cut Pro, and you literally can make a perfectly acceptable film now for under $15,000.
But you can direct from your iPhone, from your cell phone, with your sister's cousin video camera, with a webcam.
I've worked on it with sound and looping and put some music to it. It can all be done for nothing nowadays with a computer.
A whole other subset of individuals who want to tell their stories. Yeah. And they're telling them right now on their iPhones. And they're telling them right now on social media and on Twitter, I mean, on Instagram and on TikTok.
First of all, this really isn't true. The camera that most people have is an iPhone. And you can't make a whole movie on an iPhone. That's just, the technology's not there yet, unless you're Steven Soderbergh, and even then you're making it for an extremely limited audience. So, yes, if you want to make a movie, you're still going to have to shell out a lot of money for some proper equipment and some proper editing software. Now, of course, even with this, obviously, filmmaking nowadays is still much cheaper. But what a lot of those directors forget is that nowadays it's also much, much more labor-intensive than it used to. It reminds me of another thing Quentin Tarantino once said.
As a director, you don't have to do that. Your job is to hire talented people who can do that. You hire a cinematographer who can get the kind of quality that you want. You don't have to be able to know how to take the lights and move them around to create an effect. You hire a talented costume designer who can give the colors that you need and the flamboyance or not that you want. You hire a production designer who can do that. Your job is explaining your vision. Your job is articulating to them what you want on the screen.
And, you know, maybe that was true back in the day. But nowadays, if you want to become a filmmaker, you have to be a director, a writer, an expert at After Effects, an expert at editing. You have to be a jack of all trades. And some of you might be thinking, whatever, suck it up. It shouldn't matter that you have to learn all that. Because at the end of the day, you just have to do that like once, get it submitted to film festivals, and then get a distributor, and then you're golden. And you know, maybe that's how it used to work. Maybe you could just put clerks in a film festival and then boom, you have a movie career. But part of the downside of all of this technology being cheaper is suddenly there's a lot more competition. And studios are much more wary of picking up your $15,000 student film. This is something Robert Rodriguez points out.
There is a lot more competition than there was when I was, you know, like kicking around with El Mariachi. So you got, you know, there's just a lot more to do these days. You got a lot more competition because everybody's got a camera now and everybody can edit, and it's tough.
Robert Rodriguez, more than any other filmmaker, made it into the industry without luck. He wasn't born in Los Angeles. He wasn't rich. He didn't know anyone that big in the film industry. I think he knew an extra on a Spanish film, but like that was it. He had to completely self-finance the film by himself, really, by himself. The only real bit of luck he had was being born at the right time when he could make a film like El Mariachi and it be viable enough to be picked up by studios. If he was born a decade before or a decade after, there's a very good chance he might have not become a filmmaker. But let's go back to that clip and see what happens right after Rodriguez finishes talking.
It's tough. I don't know. The state of independent filmmaking changes. There's
Yeah,
like
but you know,
changes.
but at the same time, though, yeah, there's a lot more to competition, but also those crappy movies aren't competition if the fucking thing is like fucking dynamite.
There you go.
You know, all that shit is, you know, yeah, there's a lot of people out there doing stuff, but if, you know, it's like waves on the beach, all right? You make a piece of nitro that you throw in an audience's lap, you know, people notice.
Now, it's really funny to compare these two guys, because in contrast to Rodriguez, Quinn has probably had the luckiest career in Hollywood and has had to suffer the least for his art. And what's also funny is that, like Rodriguez, in the 80s, Quinn made a no-budget film, but it was never finished. It never went to festivals, and from everything I've heard about it, it's probably awful. Quinn has talked about this film as being a learning experience. That was the film that taught him how to make movies. And maybe that's true. But to be honest, we will really never know, because the film he made immediately after that had a budget most independent filmmakers can only dream of, professional actors, and Harvey Keitel holding his hand the entire process. He's also, admittedly, one of my favorite film directors, and speaking so much trash about him leaves a bad taste in my mouth. So let's just move on.
You know, if you want to be a dentist, or a lawyer, or there are rules. You do this, you do this, you do this. They give you a piece of paper. You're a dentist. Being a filmmaker, you put your hand on a rock, you say, I'm a filmmaker.
This is kind of dodging the question. Obviously, anyone can just call themselves a filmmaker. What people are really asking is, how do I pursue filmmaking as a career? But that's a bit too wordy, so they usually just say, how can I become a filmmaker?
Everybody's complaining, the industry is so stupid. I do not get the money together, and so I say, roll up your sleeves, work as a bouncer in a sex club, as a warden in a lunatic asylum, half a year, you earn $10,000, $20,000, and you can make a feature film today.
Admittedly, what Werner Herzog is saying is very funny, but if we are to take his words at face value, it is very annoying for a rich person to just say, hey, save enough money and one day you'll be able to make a film. It is extremely difficult for working class people like this, especially doing low-end jobs like being a bouncer, to save up money. And even then, to save up something like $20,000, it's going to take considerably longer than 6 months to do. Now, if you're a film professor or you're just very old school, you might be thinking I'm going about this completely the wrong way. That really, if you want to make it into the film industry, what you have to do is go to film school, become a PA, and then boom, you're a director. And that is probably the thing I hate to hear the most. The gap between being a PA and being a legitimate director is so big, it's almost comical that I've heard so many film professors suggest that this is the ultimate golden ticket into getting into the film industry. Like, I can see you becoming a PA and then working your way up to helping out the lights or becoming a gaffer. But to jump from that and somehow a studio handing you a script and saying, go ahead, make a movie, that's just, it doesn't happen. It's never happened. The closest that's ever happened with was maybe Steven Spielberg. And even then, like I've been saying, he got extremely lucky that he just wasn't kicked off the Universal lot after he snuck on. And even then, there is a huge gap in between Steven Spielberg becoming an unpaid intern to Universal funding his first short film. You look up his story, there's just like, doesn't really tell you how. It's probably because he just, like everyone else, kind of was in the right place at the right time. And that's not really interesting to write down. Speaking of place, a lot of directors are just kind of born lucky in that they were born in Los Angeles or New York or anywhere else with a huge film industry right at their fingertips. And if it wasn't obvious enough by the examples I've been giving, it is immensely easier to become a director if you're white and a man. That's not a problem that's solely in the filmmaking world, but it is something that is worth being addressed. Now, this has been talked to death, but the most obvious way of a filmmaker being lucky is through nepotism. They were just born into a family that already had a filmmaking background, and that's how they were able to get their first jobs. I have to say, the most honest and straightforward take I've seen from a director is 100% Bo Burnham.
I'd say, well, you gotta just take a deep breath and give up. The system is rigged against you. Your hard work and talent will not pay off. I would say don't take advice from people like me who've gotten very lucky. You know, we're very biased. Like Taylor Swift telling you to follow your dreams is like a lottery winner saying, liquidize your assets, buy Powerball tickets. It works.
No, but it is. What I do agree with is I give up a lot for luck. I say, I work really hard, I think I have some ability, but I also got really lucky. And when some people act like that's not part of it, it makes me a little crazy.
Yeah, of course. And we're tall white guys. We overcame nothing to be here. There was nothing standing in our way, and we barely got here. You have no chance.
Now look, I'm not saying that if you want to be a filmmaker, you should go kill yourself, or that you shouldn't look up to any of these people. I'm just saying that maybe you should take their words with a grain of salt. I hope none of this video deters people from their passions. Hell, I wrote this video and I still want to be a movie director. Just because something seems impossible doesn't mean you shouldn't try. That goes double for wanting to be a filmmaker. A job based on having a huge imagination and being a huge dreamer. After all, there is nothing wrong with dreaming.
Hello. I'm Orson Welles. I direct films and act in them. What we're always trying for, of course, is perfection. In a film, that's only a hope. But with G&G, you can rely on it. Perfection. G&G. Nika whiskey.
think it's still possible for an up-and-coming filmmaker to go the route you guys went and still be successful?
That's a good question.
Make Reservoir Dogs.